Welcome to the 45th episode of Love, Growth, and Narratives. I'm Fredrick.
And I'm Tiffany.
In honor of Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, I want to share a story I've carried for decades. I grew up in a loving home, but with a lot of pressure. My dad wanted me to be tough, yet thoughtful. My mom wanted me to be happy, yet safe. But I was a sad kid, depressed, anxious, and no one understood why. I was living in the shadows of my superstar older sister, trying to hold it all together. Even before I was beaten for being the only black kid in the neighborhood or ignored in a town where no one would speak to me, the sadness was already there. What I needed was space to explore what was happening in my head. But in the 70s and 80s, we didn't have the language for that. I didn't know I was living with high-functioning autism and undiagnosed depression. The full picture took over 40 years to come into focus. My story may be unique, but the struggles aren't. Let's talk about it.
So, Fredrick, tell me about, as far back as you can remember, when you started feeling or realizing that you were different.
So it's hard to kind of pinpoint when I actually realized I was different. What I did realize, early on was that I didn't seem to connect with people, even in childhood. When we were living in Atlanta, over the summer times from school, my mother would take us over to the YWCA. This was where she worked in the summertime. And so there was kids from all over the city there, mainly the West End, but kids from all over the city. And I just realized that Gretchen was already a leader. Gretchen's my older sister, of course, for those who don't know. She was already a leader amongst all the other kids. She's 2 years older than I am. And I was just kind of there. I always kind of felt like a plus one to my older sister, and she's just one of those people that has that it quality, that charisma. She's very attractive. She has just a way about her that just people just want to be around her. And I was the opposite. I was an awkward kid. It was hard for me to connect with people, and I didn't understand why. And I also didn't understand why I was always sad. Now, back then, I didn't realize I was always sad because I didn't really have much to compare it to.
Right.
Those things didn't come till later on.
Right. Now, how do you think your family either helped or hindered the situation? Like, how much of it was, nature versus nurture?
And that's really a hard one because I really don't know. I know that even in my family, everyone kind of gravitated towards Gretchen. Not just my parents. We would go to, my mother's side and father's side of the family are both in Atlanta, or at least were back in the 70s. And they all just gravitated to Gretchen. Everybody wanted to grab Gretchen. And so if one of them was going to the store or whatever, it was like, hey, Gretchen, come on with me. It was always that. And I just kind of was always left, to myself. And I do wonder if those things hadn't happened, would I have been a happy kid? I'm not sure. I kind of don't think so. I kind of think that I was going to be depressed and awkward no matter what my circumstance. And it wasn't like my parents treated me poorly. They didn't at all. My parents loved me. My parents did a lot with me, but understandably, it was more difficult to enjoy being with me than it was with Gretchen. And so I don't blame them. I mean, they're human. I mean, it's so she's so easy to be around and so easy to have fun with. Whereas with me, I just didn't like anything.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah, that's hard. I think that as a teacher, when I'm thinking about kids who just seem like they're on the sadder side, I never really thought of that they would be depressed because we kind of automatically, whatever's going on with the kid, we're like, there's something happening at home that's causing it. We don't often just think, well, this is just something that's within the child, and
yeah.
we try hard to make them happy by pushing things in their face and pushing them into certain situations. But are we really looking and listening to what's happening with them and, just taking a deeper look and talking to the child about how they
Yeah.
feel?
And that's hard because, I didn't realize I was depressed. And so, and so regardless of the situation, I always felt bad. And I didn't realize this until I'm well into my 40s and looking backwards at the way I was as a child, where I actually felt worse when things were going well. I actually almost felt a little better when things were going bad, which is just, ridiculous. And then, of course, my parents and everyone around me is just like the way it is now when you see a child that's down. It's like, what are you down for?
Yeah.
Everything's going well in life. What's your problem? Why
Right.
can't you be happy?
Right.
As if the child just doesn't want to be happy. Who wouldn't want to be happy?
Right. Right.
It's just that there's, it was really hard for me to figure all of that out. And I couldn't figure it out, which made me even more depressed, because when you see that you're not connecting with people, when you see that people aren't as happy to see you as they are your sister, those things kind of drive you even deeper.
And I think that as adults during that time, we didn't have the language or the know-how, and mental health support wasn't there the way it is today. I mean, we're still struggling with getting everybody involved in mental health, but it's much more available and more accepted today than it was then.
Yeah.
And I mean, schools have social workers now and counselors, elementary schools, I should
Yes.
say, right? We've been knowing high schools have had counselors for a while, but all of that extra support, because we realize the social emotional learning of a child is extremely important. But during that time, back in the 70s, early
Yes.
70s, your parents were probably just more like, okay, let's just keep, it's a conversation.
Right.
It's an experience that's going to snap you out of it. Look at your sister. Maybe that'll snap you out of it.
Right.
So it was different during that time.
Yeah, and my father would do things with me. He would take me fishing or take me to a ball game or something like that. And when he would do that, a lot of times I just wanted to get out of there and get home. And it wasn't that I didn't want to be around my father. I just didn't want to be out. I didn't want to be out and away from home. I was comfortable in my room and just kind of in my own little cocoon there. And but then it went from bad to worse when we moved from Atlanta, which was living in Ben Hill Southwest, which was an all black neighborhood. We moved to initially Point Pleasant Beach, New Jersey, which is on the Jersey Shore, and we were there for only a few months. And I remember we lived right across the street from the boardwalks. We were like right on the beach. And it was funny because we were the only black folks in the area, and we had this bay window in the front of the house. And people would actually, as they're walking down the sidewalk, they would walk up to the bay window, and it's like, hey, there really are black people there.
Wow.
It was like, it felt like a fishbowl. It was just like, look at them. That's black people. It was just, it was interesting. But so after we left there, we went to Toms River, New Jersey, which is also kind of South Jersey, mid-South Jersey, Ocean County. And I was in an all-white neighborhood again, predominantly Italian neighborhood. And it was very difficult finding friends You know, my first year or two there, I just remember constantly being jumped on the playground. And, you know, almost to the point where I almost got used to getting beat up, which, you know, of course, then drives me even deeper into depression.
How old were you around this time?
8, 9 years old, 10, something like that. Now, what I do have to highlight, and this is very important, although it has nothing to do with my mental health, was that after about the first year or two, there were some kids in my neighborhood who would step up for me. You know, and I remember one big kid, Tommy. He was same age as me, but he was kind of a, you know, larger kid. And he would just step in and say, "No, you're not doing this." And that was interesting because there was really nothing for him to gain from it, you know, because it was like that's the way the neighborhood was. But even in that neighborhood where I'm getting beat up, everybody loved Gretchen. So even in an area where she's the only black girl, I mean, there were 2 other black girls that live on the other side of the neighborhood, but they were younger. They were much younger. But she was still a superstar. People still looked up to her. Everybody wanted to be around her. She actually, when we were in elementary school, she started her own little school in the summertime in our garage in New Jersey. And she had a curriculum. She let me be the music teacher, you know, because I guess that's what I was good for. But that also kind of took me in a direction because I was constantly comparing myself to my sister and how, you know, awesome she is. And then looking at myself, and I had the opposite experience. So yeah, that was pretty tough.
That's got to be hard. That's got to be hard. And looking back, do you think you noticed any other males maybe going through what you were going through, or just you were just too much in your own world?
You know what? There probably were, but I was in my head. I was really spending too much time in my own head, which, you know, when you're depressed is really where you don't want to be. You know, is in your head.
Right.
But I was always just thinking about how miserable I was. And so it was hard to figure a way out. And there again, because I didn't understand depression, I didn't understand autism. So I just felt like I was just that weird kid, you know, and I would blame my parents because I said, you know, you moved me to this all white area away from Atlanta. But then my mother would quickly say, yeah, but in Atlanta, you weren't happy either, which is true, which is absolutely true. So we were there for, I don't remember. It might have been 3 or 4 years. It was at least 3. And then we moved to a suburb of Pittsburgh, Mount Lebanon, which is right outside of Pittsburgh. And there again, another all-white neighborhood, predominantly Jewish neighborhood. And there was actually worse than Toms River, New Jersey. Because at least in Toms River, I honestly did have a couple of friends. Honestly did have a few people that I hung out with, that I played ball with, all of that kind of stuff. In Pittsburgh, in Mount Lebanon, I had nobody. I mean, honestly, nobody. And I remember I had one kid who I guess he was calling himself being nice to me, and he would tell me, nobody's going to speak to you.
Wow.
It's just that's the way it is. Nobody's going to speak to you. Now, I was not the only black kid in the neighborhood. There was another black kid in the neighborhood named Tommy, and he grew up in that neighborhood, and he was, how do I say, well assimilated. and so he had friends and stuff like that. And he he probably liked me less than everybody else did. So if everybody else didn't like me, he really didn't like me. And so, yeah, that was a tough time. Luckily, we only lived there for a year, a little over a year. But that was the first time, actually the only time in my life when I honestly considered and wanted to plan out suicide. When I was just like, I can't do this anymore.
Now, were you sharing all of these feelings and thoughts with your parents?
No,
No.
because what am I going to say? When, if I talk to my mother, because my mother, her knee-jerk reaction is to try to make me happy, which is, what a parent's supposed to do.
Right.
And but that wasn't helping me. I needed someone to help me figure out what was going on in my head. I mean, I didn't know what I needed, so I kept a lot of it to myself. Both of my parents worked a lot at that time, and so we were latchkey kids. And so because there were times when we really didn't have any money, Gretchen and I just sitting around in the house, and, we had, one TV, and because she was the oldest, she got to watch it, and I would just have to watch whatever she was watching. And, but yeah, it was pretty tough for me. And, that was definitely the darkest time, was that year. I think I was 11 I was 11 at the time. And that was probably the darkest time that I can honestly remember in my life, because because of the way Mount Lebanon is, it's a really hilly neighborhood. And I remember going outside and looking up to the top of the house and wondering if I could climb up there and just jump off of it and land into the driveway, what that would do to me.
Wow.
So I was actually thinking about these things, sometimes, because my mother worked for the Urban League at the time. And sometimes we would ride the bus down to her job. And, in Pittsburgh, if you've never been to Pittsburgh, it's all bridges. It's just a million bridges. And I remember riding the bus over one of these bridges and wondering if I just jumped out of the bus real quick and leapt over the rail, what would happen.
My goodness.
And, it was pretty tough.
Yeah.
It was pretty tough.
Now, what would I would imagine kids are going through that now to this day with more resources and everything. What would you say to parents and the adults in kids' lives who may be like that, who may be going through something like that? Like, what you're saying your parents didn't know, you didn't tell them. Teachers probably didn't get as close to students as teachers do today.
No, not at all.
But is there anything you'd want the adults in your life that you wish that they had done differently to help you during that time?
Well, what I wish they would have done, I don't think they had access to. And I think that would have been therapy. And, therapy wasn't a thing in the 70s and early 80s. And so I don't, outside of that, I don't know how they could have helped me. I really don't. I don't.
I mean, we could probably say, I'm also a child that moved quite a bit. We could probably say stability would be important.
Yeah.
Noticing what kind of friendships your child has, because that social piece is very important. The kind of people they hang around with, what they're doing, and kind of people the fact that they don't hang around with people. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Parents can find ways to intervene to help their child build relationships. I think if a parent does notice something with their child, like reaching out to the teacher, because a lot of times kids are different at school, and we can notice some things, but there's so many kids, and asking the teacher to look for certain things and reaching out and asking about resources. I mean, clearly they saw there was something different. They didn't have the words that we all have maybe today, but they saw that there was something.
Right.
And today we would just say to parents, hey, reach out to the school, reach out to the teacher, reach out to a therapist. I know that therapy can be taboo in certain cultures.
Yes.
And even sometimes religions. I know that in the past, I've had parents deny it because of their religion. I think we need to make that more a part of schooling, just checking in with students, because sometimes we only recommend counseling to students who have a really big situation going on that's just blatant. Maybe they're disrupting the entire class.
Right.
But it shouldn't have to be all that. You can kind of tell. Now as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking of students from the past who I would say were probably depressed.
Yeah, and back then, my parents did what everybody else did, was kind of, what's the problem? What's wrong with you? Mm-hmm. And of course I would say nothing. And it wasn't that nothing was wrong with me, but I didn't know what was wrong with me.
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's the part that people don't understand.
Right.
I had no idea that I was depressed.
Right.
When you've been that way your entire life, that's your normal.
Yeah.
And so how do you realize that you're not normal?
Mm-hmm.
And I think also the way I spoke to people didn't put me in a position to get a lot of friends. And so it was so much to unpack that I really don't know what someone could have done other than finding me a therapist or something like that. But I don't even know if there were child psychologists around back then. There may have been. They were probably really expensive.
Right.
So,
but today you're saying that's what you would recommend.
Today when there's a child who is acting different from their circumstances, so if you have a child that grew up in a good home and they're always happy, they're always upset, or they're always disruptive, or they're always something that seems so far outside of the environment that they're in, you can't put it on the child to fix it because they don't know what they're fixing.
Right.
When you've been that way your whole life, that's your normal. And so that's when you have to get them into some level of counseling, therapy, something like that, where they have someone to try to unpack all of that with.
Agreed. I think the sooner the better. Not this idea that they'll grow out of it.
No.
There's a big idea about that, especially I feel like with boys, which we're, going back to Men's Health Month and everything. I think with boys, we're expecting them to be tough.
Yes.
Just deal with whatever you're dealing with. Just deal with it.
Yeah.
Don't mention it and keep moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, and my father wanted me to be, like I said, tough yet thoughtful, and so I got into a lot of fights as a kid, way too many fights. And
that was your idea of being tough.
It was because my whole life I was afraid to fight, but I figured if I kept getting into fights, it's really stupid. But I figured if I kept fighting, that eventually I would get over the fear. And so I got beat up a lot because I was fighting kids that I really shouldn't have been fighting, bigger than me or stronger than me, whatever the case may be. I just couldn't allow someone to say things to me, to treat me a certain way. I couldn't let things go, and I just figured, I'm going to keep fighting until I get the fear out of me. And, unfortunately, in high school, there was a guy I went to school with, Hanif, who was good at fighting. And I was talking to him one day, and he said, I'm afraid to fight, which blew my mind. I was like, what, you're afraid? But you beat up people. I mean, you're good at it. He said, yeah, but I'm afraid. I just use that fear for strength. And I was like, oh, it was just like mind blowing. And I wish that he and I had that conversation like, many years
Yeah.
before that. 'Cause like, oh, so you're still afraid, but you're using the fear. Got it. Okay. Okay. So yeah, it was that was a hard thing to come upon,
So at what point did you realize, that it was depression?
Oof. So I would say it was in my 40s, which is crazy.
No one had ever mentioned that to you. I mean, I know that your family did it when you were younger, but by the time you're 40, you have to be around lots of different friends and people and in relationships. No one ever questioned it or, brought it up to you that you might be depressed.
I masked it well because I was a very vocal person, kind of like my father. I was outgoing and spoke a lot. And so I don't think that people who were around me kind of realized that. I mean, the people who were around me a lot, I'm sure they saw it. My best friend Robert saw it. Some of the people that were around me. But I realized that I was bringing everything down. And like I said, it wasn't until my 40s. But then you have the situation with the autism, which actually made it a whole lot worse because I didn't understand why I couldn't fit in with everyone else. And I desperately wanted to fit in and I didn't. And, I couldn't figure it out, so why did I talk differently and think differently? Why everyone else, liked this thing and I didn't? And it was weird because the more people around me that liked something, immediately the less I liked it. And I couldn't figure out why. I'm like, why do I, even when it came down to like basketball, everybody was into Michael Jordan. I was like, I can't stand Michael Jordan. And a lot of that was because, I was a fan of Magic and Magic Johnson and Isaiah Thomas were just my favorite players growing up. And so I guess a lot of that was because Jordan beat both of them. But yeah, I couldn't get into the things that everyone got into, even though I really desperately tried. But I think in terms of the autism, one of the things that really made me question this, when my daughter was, I think she was probably maybe 5 or 6 years old. And I was using, I think it was me that was using the iron at the time, ironing clothes, and I sat the iron on the floor. And she walked past and her leg hit the iron. And she's screaming. I mean, obviously because she's burning, and I didn't know what to do. I'm standing there feeling like an idiot. I'm like, what the hell is wrong with you? How do I not know what to do? My daughter has burned herself, and basically, which was my fault in the first place. And she's sitting there crying and screaming, and I don't know what to do. And I became angry at myself. I was, that really drove me even deeper into depression because it's like, what the hell is wrong with you? Why can't you figure that out? Why can't you have natural human emotions for your daughter sitting there hurting? My wife at the time, now ex-wife, she came into the room and kind of helped her out. And, my stepdaughter came over and helped out. And I'm standing there just feeling like an idiot. Why can't I do something that comes naturally to most people? And so that kind of really jarred me. I still didn't know what it was, but this was, I was still in my 30s then. and I couldn't figure it out. But there were other things that would happen where it's like, why does my mind go blank in circumstances where it seems like anyone else in the world would know what to do?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that was tough. But we flashed towards my 40s, and this was around the time I was starting to enter government in the Department of Defense, and I was in some leadership positions, and I said, I have to be better than this. And initially, I sought out a psychologist, and started talking to him about the things that I just couldn't figure out. And even then, I was still kind of surface level because I didn't realize what was down in there. And he brought it up. He said, "It seems like you have Asperger's." And I mean, I didn't know what the heck that was.
Mm-hmm.
And he kind of explained it to me. That sent me down a rabbit hole. And then I had a guy I used to work with, Daryl, who also has Asperger's. And he started kind of telling me the same thing. He said, "You have these exact same traits."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay. So, then I start researching, I'm Googling it to death and
Mm-hmm.
doing all kind of research. And I ended up with a therapist a couple of years later. And because I was trying to figure out why my thoughts just don't seem to be in line with everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then she brought it up, and I'm like, okay, so this has got to be a thing. Now, initially, when I came to the realization that that's probably what it was, it felt like a weight was lifted off of me, because it's like, okay, this is why.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I spent probably that year just being like, okay, whew, I feel so much better. This is why I don't act the way other people do. Okay, got it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But then I started reading more and more about what they would call neuroplasticity, and I wondered, okay, I this is who I am, but is this who I have to be?
Mm.
Is this where the story ends?
Mm-hmm.
Am I just going to be that guy who goes through life and can't figure out how to deal with people?
Mm-hmm.
Because the other thing was, being in a high tech field, I was in telecom for 20 years, and I loved being in technology because I felt like I understood things, but I couldn't understand people.
Mm.
And getting to a level of expertise in telecom was mainly because I just really loved it, because things made sense to me. When I'm dealing with equipment, even electrical equipment, things just kind of made sense. But then I get around people and none of it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went through a point in my life where I just said, I just don't like people.
Yeah.
I just really don't like people. But as I started to try to figure out how I could be better, I started doing things. I would read a few books here and there, and I was like, okay, let me try some things.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to what I would do is I would go into meetings when I was this is around the time that I actually went into government, and I would be in meetings, and I would say, I want to remember. I want to see how much I can remember from the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was one of those guys where I talked a lot in the meeting. I was like, well, here's my opinion, and here's what we should do, and all this kind of stuff. And I said, you know what? Let me take a step back.
Mm-hmm.
And so when, after each meeting, I would go back to my office and try to recount all of what was said. Not just what was said, but then I was trying to think of when that person said it, what could they possibly have been thinking?
Mm-hmm.
And that was really hard for me because I had basically no level of emotional intelligence. But I said, I can be better than this. And this brings me to one of my favorite sayings. I heard this on a TV show one day. I don't even remember the show, but the saying is, you'll never get a racehorse from a pig, but you can get a really fast pig. And so when I was thinking of that, I said, I am not going to be this emotional genius. However, I can be a whole lot more emotionally intelligent than I am now. And that's what I want to work towards. And so I really went on this path. And so this was also around the time I started realizing the depression. And so I'm kind of trying to hit both of them at the same time. And so a lot of it was trying to get out of my own head and trying to learn other people, which was very difficult for me. And there were too many meetings where I would go back to my office and I'd be like, I don't remember anything that anybody said. I remember what I was thinking. I remember what I said, but I don't remember anything. So I was like, oh, okay, I screwed that up. And so one of the things that I did, and this was one of the things that helped me, was, and I even put it on my calendar, every Tuesday and Thursday, I would have what I called a QL day. And it was actually on my calendar. And when you get to a certain level within government, your calendar is kind of shared in the agency. So everybody in the agency could, who wanted to see my calendar could see that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, all day was a QL day, but nobody knew what it was. And the only person I told was a good friend of mine, Devon. He's the only one that knew. But QL was question and listen, because I was good at kind of telling people, or giving people advice on here's what to do to fix this, to create that. And I said, no. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I will give no orders, no directives. I will not tell anybody what to do. I will question and see if I can help them to come around to the answer themselves. And I'm going to listen to them to see if they have a better idea than I do, or if they have an idea that will get to the objective the same way, but it's just different. And that was something that also in the beginning, it was different. It was difficult, but I got better at it. And I also was doing things to try to get out of my depression, really trying to look at life and trying to show gratitude and things of that nature. And it was helpful. It was helpful. It not really enough, but at least I was on the road. So I've talked a lot, but.
Well, let me ask you, you shared some really amazing things and appreciate that you are sharing in that stuff, and hopefully it will help someone else. But what advice would you give to young men, or just men in at any age, right, to help them be better? Because I feel like a lot of men are struggling with depression, or struggling with who they're supposed to be versus who they want to be. And what advice would you give to them?
Well, I tell you, one of the things with mental health becoming more important, it's awesome that I'm now seeing more men actually have real conversations with each other. So I think that's great. I think you have to get with men who also are trying to figure things out. I think there's no way around that. You have to get around a group. And if you have a group that's not willing to be vulnerable and not willing to try to learn things from an emotional perspective, you've just got the wrong group. I'm sorry. You're going to have to find another group. If you can't get them to kind of get on that road, you know, I still think that therapy was important. Also, it honestly, it wasn't until, because I was in therapy off and on for a lot of the years when I was in government, but I was still not scratching the surface of what was going on. It wasn't until I moved out here to California, to Los Angeles, that I really started to dig in. And I had this one young lady who was my therapist. And the great thing about her was she wouldn't let me off the hook. Because she'd say, "What's going on with you?" And I was like, I don't know. She'd be like, "Nah, not good enough. Not good enough." And what I found was there were so many things that when things would happen, it was like my mind would just suck it to the back of my brain, And so I was always, I'm good. No, I'm good. I can handle it. I'm good.
Yeah.
But I wasn't, and I didn't realize it. That was the whole thing. I honestly didn't realize I wasn't good. I thought I was. But when she kind of helped me to crack that nut there, everything poured out. It was like, all of these things and things that I didn't even remember. I'm like, whoa, where'd that come from? And because I had been dealing with it for so long, it was a lot. I mean, you're talking about at the time, over 40 years worth of stuff, worth of unprocessed issues.
Right.
And I couldn't imagine, luckily I'm not a violent person. I couldn't imagine if I was a violent person, what I would have done in a circumstance like that. I mean, all those unresolved issues,
right.
It's got to come out somehow. But that really kind of started the process of, unpacking these things. But it took a lot of work on my part, because the one thing I will say to people, and I think the person who said it best was a guy named Ed Milet, who's got a podcast that I listen to a lot on the weekends. And he said, the mind moves towards comfort. And when I heard that just encapsulated it perfectly. And I started researching, and you start getting into the way the mind works. And the mind wants you to be comfortable, not better, comfortable. And if depression is comfortable for you, that's where it wants to keep you. And that's why you have, a woman who's been abused will just continuously go from one abusive relationship to the other. Or a guy who spent a lot of time in prison, and you're wondering why he's not happy to be out, because the mind said, hey, man, you're comfortable behind those cell walls. You're comfortable like that, and so let's get back to that. Let's get back to comfort. And so you have to fight your own mind until those neurons start to rewire, which they will.
Yeah.
In most cases, they'll start to rewire, and you'll start to see, okay, because when you start changing what normal is, your mind will eventually catch up and start wiring itself where it's like, yeah, that's exactly what we want to be. Yeah, that's great. But you have to battle your own mind to get there. And that's tough.
Yeah. But it's doable. You've done it.
Yeah.
And you continue to do it.
Yeah, and I'm not done.
Yeah.
This is not one of those stories where it's, it's victory, I've fixed it. No. No.
It's a journey.
Yeah. I can say I'm a million times better than I was, but I've got a long way to go. And for men, we have to do these things.
Yeah.
We owe it to the women in our lives. We owe it to our children, And more than anything, we owe it to ourselves to just try to break through this.
Yeah.
And but I don't know. I still can't figure out what someone could have done to break me out of it. I had to see that it was a problem. I had to first see that these things aren't right.
Right.
And the same thing with the autism. Some of it I've had to kind of settle with, but a lot of it I've decided not to. I want to be more emotionally intelligent. So I've done things to put myself out there where I can listen to people and try to figure out what's going on with them and everything. And, it's better.
Yeah, good.
It's better.
That's all we can ask for, is to be better. Be better each day and keep working on ourselves, and hope that we have people in our lives who support that. And I think you said something crucial about your peers.
Yes.
That's important when kids are young, their peers, and going into teenage years. I think in young adulthood, the people that you hang around really can impact things.
Absolutely.
Negatively or positively.
Absolutely.
And
your parents as well.
Yes. You need to be vulnerable. That's a piece that we all need. Men need a little more of that. I think women tend to be, but we have to be vulnerable in the right places and times, and the right people, and just keep going. You got to keep going.
And you got to know how to be vulnerable. It's not as, if you've never done it before, it's not something that just magically happens.
It takes practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
absolutely. And it'll scare you when you first start doing it, and it's going to seem awkward and everything else, but it's definitely something that's absolutely worth it. But what I would say to parents when you have a child, and I've said this already, but I can't say this strongly enough. If your child is not happy when it seems like everything is going right, it's not the child's fault. It really isn't their fault. You got to start figuring out, or helping them to figure out what's going on in there that's keeping them that way. And there's a good chance it could be something clinical. You just don't know.
Right.
But blaming the child, what the hell's wrong with you? Why can't you just be happy about anything? That just doesn't help.
Yeah.
It really doesn't.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing. This is amazing. And I hope out there's some men that can take something from here, parents that could take something from here, or just the men in your lives. Share this with them, or give them some of the questions that are needed to lead them to this space. So thank you so much, Fredrick.
Yeah, and I'm so thankful for the people around me that have helped me out. A lot of my great friends on the East Coast, and a lot of my, wonderful, awesome friends on the West Coast, like my guys from Black Men Run, who we talk about everything with. It's also critical to have a life partner that you can talk through these things with, who is going to use it as a group project, and not use it as a way of putting you down, once you get into an argument and stuff like that. Doesn't have a way of weaponizing it. And so, having you in my life has really helped me to turn some corners here. So I really appreciate it. And I think I've said enough, because I could go on forever, and I don't want to do that. But do you have anything else?
No, I think you should wrap it up.
Okay. So for this episode of Love, Growth, and Narratives in June, Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, which I'm normally not into those month things, but this one is kind of important. I'm Fredrick.
And I'm Tiffany.
Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.